Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old Fourth Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
Buckle your seatbelts, Georgia. We are in for a bumpy ride. The last line of an op-ed that appears in today's Georgia Recorder, georgiarecorder.com. Friend of the show, frequent guest, returning champion, Jay Bookman writes this op-ed. The headline, Trump deportations, tariffs will stifle Georgia's farming and tax-subsidized EV industries. We will have him on in just a few minutes. Wanted to share a little bit of his op-ed before we have him on. Hi, thank you for listening to The Ron Show, whether it's on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, Progressive Voices, or wherever you podcast. Jay Bookman writes, on January 20th, a new administration takes power in Washington, and boy, does it have plans. Lots and lots of plans. If carried out as described in the recent presidential campaign, those plans have the potential to fundamentally remake the American economy for better or worse. Bookman writes, the stakes are particularly important for Georgia. For a generation or longer, reaching back to the audacious and surprisingly successful effort to woo the Olympics to Atlanta in 1996, Georgia has been working to remake itself, to transition into a fully integrated, sophisticated player in a global economy. It has the world's busiest airport. It has invested billions of dollars in port infrastructure in Savannah and Brunswick, with billions more committed. It has become the most important logistics center in the southern United States, employing hundreds of thousands of working Georgians. However, the high tariffs championed by the incoming administration are incompatible with a global economy. Tariffs are designed to break that system, to slow, if not stop, the container ship traffic into Savannah, Brunswick, and other ports. When other countries retaliate by raising tariffs of their own, as they will, America will also export considerably less as well. Jay Bookman writes, those effects will not occur by accident. They are not a side effect of tariffs. They are the outcome that tariffs are designed to produce. Jay goes on to write how the tariffs will affect the EV manufacturing industry, an industry that Governor Brian Kemp and Georgia Republicans have put billions of Georgia taxpayer dollars towards making Georgia much like what Detroit was to the motor vehicle industry. And then Jay talks about the other promise, the other big promise of the incoming Trump administration, mass deportations and the effects it'll have on the federal budget and the national and global and Georgia economy. Joining me to discuss this piece, Jay Bookman from the Georgia Recorder. Good morning. How are you?
Doing well.
So I thought your first of all, the length of this piece I think is long enough that it spells out exactly what needs to be said, but not so long that folks go, okay, too long, didn't read. That is an art form in journalism today, is it not? I mean, you have to write a piece that folks will read and read all of it and get the full gist of it without folks looking at the length and breadth of it and going, okay, I just don't have time for that right now.
That is the goal. Yes.
But I mean, I thought you handled it quite well. I mean, you could have said, you know what, I'm going to write a nice long column on tariffs, and I'm going to write a nice long column on mass deportations, and got a 2-for-1 out of it, and probably got paid more. But anyway, I liked that you married this, and you made this very much a conversation about the ripple effects. I don't think it'll be ripple. I think it'll be wave effects, tsunami effects on the Georgia economy. Let's start with the tariffs part first, which, you know, you and I and most economists have warned for a long time, in this cycle, that are going to affect just about everything we touch. The American voter seems to have been moved by the cost of things, griping about the price of bread, griping about the cost of eggs, irrespective of the fact that the global economy was affected by the pandemic and supply chain crunches. And when it comes to eggs, we look at like avian flu. We've had a couple of waves of avian flu that have affected that. And Democrats did not do a good job in messaging against that concern. But tariffs aren't going to make it better.
No, they're designed, intended to make it worse. And one important reason I put those things together in the column is because they work both toward the same end. Tariffs are going to raise the cost of everything. Mm-hmm. That's what they're intended to do. They're intended to raise the cost and to discourage importation.
Mm-hmm.
So imported food is going to become more expensive. And then if we deport millions of undocumented workers who are the backbone of our agricultural industry, domestically produced food is going to increase in cost. So you've got a double whammy effect that are going to cascade. And if they are serious about those two things, which they appear to be, tariffs and deportations, there's no other way around it. That's the way the world works.
I've been sort of guessing here, and I could be completely wrong. I could find out completely the opposite within a year. I've been guessing that a lot of the rhetoric was just that, campaign rhetoric, and that we would get a diet version of both of these, that the tariffs wouldn't be that sweeping, and that the mass deportation would be limited towards those who are known criminals. Now, I've been beating this drum since the week before Election Day, that actually Donald Trump was worse about known criminals coming into this country than Joe Biden was. The Cato Institute released a study, I believe on October 30th, that bore that out, that he actually, by a nearly, I think it was like a 5-2 margin, let in more known criminals because he was so much more concerned about numbers. You know, he's big on crowd sizes, so that he was working on just stopping as many people as possible from coming in, family detentions, and of course separating children, et cetera, and so on, that the intricacies of targeting criminals was something that Border Patrol and customs agents weren't as focused on. And because of that, more known criminals came into the country under Donald Trump than Joe Biden. But my theory being, I almost think that the deportation thing is going to be focused more on these same known criminals who are either here illegally or coming here illegally than it will be about sweeping up, abuela who may work, in a kitchen or in some sort of industry where abuela could work, and soften the blow of the deportation part. And then, of course, the tariffs, I feel like maybe it won't be as wide sweeping right away, because I think Donald Trump wants to take an economy he inherited that's, by most metrics in really good shape, and not do too much damage to it. I mean, I could be wrong. I just kind of feel like he's going to ease into the hot tub instead of cannonballing in. What do you think?
There are signs that is true. There are signs, on the other hand, that it is not true. You have Tom Homan, the new designated ICE leader, suggesting that it's going to concentrate on the criminals, which is possible evidence in behalf of your argument. But you've got Trump himself saying that he's going to, on the first day, declare a national emergency and activate the military to be used for these deportations. If you're going to target the criminals, there's no use for the military, right. And that the only reason you would activate the military for that kind of thing would be for a major operation. So I think you could read it either way, and if you look at what else they're doing with things like nominations and et cetera, there's little sign that they're going to be
soft pedaling anything
mature about this. This is they've built up a head of rage that they want to vent. Appears to me. So I don't know the answer to that. I'll be very interested to see that. I'll be interested to. I don't think I can bring myself to watch it. Trump's second inaugural address, but my expectation is that people talked about how weird. Remember, George Bush said that was some weird shit on the first inaugural. I think this one's going to make that look like the Gettysburg Address. So we'll see.
And also, there are tea leaves. We see that the state of Texas says, hey, we've got a lot of property down here if you'd like to build a detention facility or a processing facility to cycle people back out. So I could see where...
And you've got the private prison company saying, oh, boy, we're going to be rolling in the dough now.
Yeah.
So they have a full expectation that this is going to not just be focusing on criminals, that this is a larger scale effort.
What do you make of the fact that this plan seems to be leaning on resources that are budgeted by other entities? And by that, I mean, it appears that the sales pitch is that they're going to have local law enforcement participating in this, in so much as a threat that if they don't participate or aren't willing to participate, that they would then withhold federal funding.
I think that's almost certain to happen. Now the degree of cooperation is a that will be required. To me, that's the question. If they get an undocumented immigrant into the prisons, into the justice system, if they require notification to ICE for the person's removal, that's one thing. If they are requiring local police departments to commit significant manpower to going out and finding, going into immigrant communities and arresting otherwise law-abiding citizen, that's a whole different thing. So the scale of it will matter.
Which again is another ripple effect, I think, of this sweeping argument, the sweeping sales pitch about mass deportations. If you are going to take local law enforcement and put them to use in these huge raids, you are taking them off of whatever their beat is or whatever their focus is. This can have an effect on crime as well. Never mind the economic impact of the tariffs and the mass deportations having an effect and creating higher prices and the effects that too will have on crime, because folks who need things and don't have money for things commit crimes to get things. Crime exists where opportunity doesn't, where the economy is suppressed, and that could have another ripple effect.
Sure, and as you your point earlier about what are your priorities? If these officers are arresting families with 4 children and both parents working, and they have a house and they're renting, and that they go in and their manpower is being used to find people like that and deport them. That manpower is not being used to actually find the criminals.
Yeah,
whether documented or undocumented.
Yeah, it's again just another ripple effect of some overarching themes of the incoming Trump presidency, from the campaign trail to seeing if it all comes to fruition. We're with Jay Bookman at the Georgia Recorder. His new op-ed landing today. We'll include that in the show notes at ronshowatl.com, spelling out how Trump's plans to tariff us into submission, and of course the mass deportations will have a drastic impact on the Georgia economy. I want to talk about the EV industry and all that the state has done to prop itself up in that realm and the effects tariffs can have on that. When the Ron Show returns on America One Radio and Progressive Voices via TuneIn. You can follow the Ron Show on your preferred social media platforms. We are on Blue Sky at Ron Show ATL. Twitter X still there. I hang out there just to keep eyes on the crazies. Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and if you're on Twitter X as well, then that's fine. Just hang out with us at Ron Show ATL. Jay Bookman joining us from the Georgia Recorder. You wrote a good 3 or 4 paragraphs on the fact that Georgia has invested a lot of money, not just in ports and shipping in and out of the country, but also the EV industry. Brian Kemp, putting billions of dollars in incentives, Georgia taxpayer dollars on the line to develop an EV industry that could be greatly impacted by Trump's plans to tariff.
Well, not just to tariff, but to dismantle the system of federal incentives to support the emerging EV industry.
Yeah.
Those are likely there's a $7,500
that's right
tax credit if you buy an electric vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
The indications are that the administration will remove that. There's a lot of money in the Inflation Reduction Act to try to subsidize and incentivize the electric vehicle industry. That money is likely to disappear because the whole thrust of the incoming administration is climate change is not a real problem.
Which Which doesn't marry very well, in all honesty, with his mass deportation problem. I've tried to explain this to folks, to zoom out a little bit and realize, people don't just decide, El Salvador is nice, but I really think I'd like to go to I'd like to go to Laredo, Texas instead. There are reasons people leave their home country. It's not a comfortable decision. It's not one that folks take lightly. They do so because of whether it's economic instability, political instability, or environmental concerns. And we are, as a first world country, the first world country on this planet, we are a lot of the reason why climate change chases them away from where they are.
That is true. And if areas become less inhabitable, if heat, drought, storms make parts of the world difficult to live in, those people they're not going to stay there.
Yeah. You name dropped Elon Musk, by the way, who obviously is the CEO at Tesla and a top advisor for the Trump administration coming in. And that Elon sort of supports, these kind of reductions in the incentives, having captured, as you write, almost 50% of the domestic EV market. But don't you think that Trump's probably going to do some carve-outs to aid Tesla picking a winner versus all the losers?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It's going to be and on tariffs in general. If you're a CEO of a company that is friendly to Trump, that says nice things in public about Trump, that donates money to the GOP or does business with Trump hotels, you're going to have a good argument for getting exempted from the tariffs. I mean, I have no doubt whatsoever that that's going to be part of the equation in Washington.
So I keep bouncing around a little bit, and I apologize for that. But going back to the mass deportations, I'm a real estate agent, so I get my daily little digest from Realtor.com. And one of their articles, the headline: Trump's election boosts Republican homebuyer optimism as Democrats' hopes sink. Now, roughly 1 in 5 Republicans say they are now more likely to buy a home as a result of the election. 24% of Democrats say they are now less likely to buy a home in the next 12 months. I'm a real estate agent. I'm a realtor. I understand what the cost of building a home is like, and how the supply chain crunch really deeply impacted it. And obviously, the spike in demand, despite the lack of supply that has developed over the last quarter century. But let's throw some cold water on this. If you take away a chunk of the construction, workforce through mass deportations, what's that going to do to the cost of a home, Jay?
That's going to increase it, as will tariffs on Canadian lumber. The whole range of, as will the cost of washing machines and dryers and clothes dishwashers, which are all made overseas. Those are going to have tariffs on. So every little bit of putting a new home together, the costs are going to increase.
And with goods and services, obviously, we're going to see an increase in the price of those sorts of items, as you mentioned, and of course, going to the grocery store. We talked about that before. There's also, the scepter of draconian cuts to public assistance funds, welfare, TANF, SNAP benefits, et cetera, and so on. It almost seems like the cruelty is the point, and the folks who have been doing all the complaining about the cost of groceries from a partisan lens are just going to stop doing so.
Well, perhaps from the partisan lens, but as we've discussed here today, those prices, if these policies are carried out as promised, those prices are going to jump considerably from where they already are. And it's going to be impossible not to notice.
So what do Democrats do? Do they just sit back and let it happen, or do they try and fight it off and, again, kind of fall victim to normalizing, the Trump presidency, the second Trump presidency? Or do they sit back and say to the American people, hey, you FA'd and now you're going to FO?
That's part of it. But I've been advocating for a while now that, we live in Georgia. We saw all those ads that became impossible to, escape.
Yeah.
Take some of that money run ads now that say Trump is doing this and he's doing this and it's going to cause things to go up. Watch and see.
Yeah.
Provide people with a narrative beforehand of what's going to happen because of this, so that when they start to see these things happening, they understand, oh, this is because of that. It is a much more effective, efficient use of campaign money to do that now during non-campaign season. The marginal return on an additional campaign ad in November of, early November, late October is very small. But if you can create basically an education program telling people, we think these policies are going to have these effects, and if they have these effects, you will now know where they came from.
Yeah.
I think that's the way to go. Is to Democratic ability to stop these policies is pretty small, but the Democratic ability to point to them and warn people about them and to predict what are very predictable outcomes is important.
I want to pick up on that. I got to take a hard break here, but let's talk about messaging when the Ron Show returns. America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn.
This is the Ron Show on America One Radio.
We're with Jay Bookman from the Georgia Recorder. Wrote an op-ed in today's Georgia Recorder. We'll have it in the show notes at ronshowatl.com. He speaks to the fact, Georgians, buckle up. Buckle your seatbelts. We're in for a bumpy ride. Tariffs and mass deportations are going to have an impact on the Georgia economy and your pocketbook. We were talking, as your opinion piece does, about tariffs, and I can't help but wonder if the idea is to pull the old switcheroo. Okay, yeah, you're going to feel that in the pocketbook. The tariffs are going to be there, but maybe this is a way for Republicans to get their supreme wish list dream of all time to eliminate the income tax and somehow replace that with the tariffs as a consumption tax. Now, I've always argued against a consumption tax because it affects the consumers, and the wealthy, they don't feel that stuff. It's nothing to them. 5-10% of whatever they spend, that's nothing. But to a single mom who has to manage her household budget, it's going to have an impact. I mean, do you see that could be the setup for that sort of pivot?
No, absolutely. There's several points there. One is that working class, middle class Americans spend a much bigger portion of their income on consumer items that are going to be subject to tariff.
Yeah.
They'll spend 80% of their income on things that they need that will have tariffs applied to them. Whereas a wealthy person, they might spend 20% of their income on that. So the tax burden is going to be much higher on the working class and middle class than it is on the wealthy.
Oh, look, and the wealthy get a bigger tax cut than the working class again, which takes us back to messaging.
Let's not stop there.
Yeah.
The other part about tariffs is it's an invisible tax.
Yeah.
The income tax is something that on April 15th or whenever the day is, you see your bill and you say, damn, look at what I had to pay. The tariffs are invisible. You're paying them even though you when you go buy something, there's not a line item on at Target that says you just paid $5 extra because of tariffs.
That's an excellent point. It's a hidden way of taking more of your money.
Yes.
I make that argument all the time, especially at the state level. Every time you hear about, the state of Georgia is going to cut taxes. Yeah, okay, great. That means less funding for maintaining your roads and your highways, which means you're going to buy more tires, and the tires cost you money just as well. What if those tires actually cost more than whatever additional little bit of tax the state needs to maintain the roads better? That's the sort of thing that I call a hidden tax, just as you definitely point out, a tariff would be.
Yes, yeah, that's a fair comparison.
So when we stopped before the break, we were talking about messaging and how Democrats could do better at it. I have talked for the last couple of weeks about the lack of a left-wing version of the right-wing ecosystem, and I know that folks on the right believe, no, you guys have the media, you have the mainstream media, but the mainstream media gets that label, I think, a bit erroneously, only because, as I arrogantly point out, facts, math, data, science, logic, they all have a liberal bias. And so journalists who are seeking to tell the truth and to tell a story as it is are going to be perceived to have a liberal bias. When your party's ideology is built on falsities, climate change is a hoax, trickle-down economics will eventually trickle down to the working class. The best diplomacy is military might. When your ideology is built on falsities and things that cannot be proven, then yes, the mainstream media is going to seem like it's got a liberal bent. That being said, when you look at what the right has in a right-wing ecosystem, talk radio, 3 or 4, I don't even, you see, you got Fox News, OANN, and the Right Side Broadcasting, which I just think was an arm of the Trump, and then Newsmax, and punditry, and the podcasts ecosystem that the right seemed to got to
Sinclair Broadcasting.
I forgot about Sinclair. You're right. They own hundreds of TV stations across the country, as does Fox owned and operated stations as well. Local television even is dominated by right-wing ownership and corporate ownership. And make no mistake, if folks want to point to MSNBC or NBC News, we just saw Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski go down to bend the knee and kiss the ring at Mar-a-Lago, and they are owned by Comcast. They are a large corporate entity, and at the end of the day, profits are going to matter more. We've seen an infiltration at CNN that's a little bit more, right-leaning. The left doesn't have an ecosystem like the right does. So messaging is going to matter. And I thought that what you said, start using some of this campaign money to portray the narrative outside the campaign cycle is brilliant. And also, we talked off the air, would be more receptive to the audience hearing it. Whereas in an election cycle, we just shut down.
Yeah, I think that's critically important. And I think the dependence on mainstream media is foolish. I think the analysis, the postmortems of the Democratic defeat, blaming it on the mass media or the mainstream media, is also foolish. Because if you look at the exit polls, I don't have the numbers right here at hand, but the people who read newspapers or newspaper websites voted for the Democrats, 8-1, something like that. Mm-hmm. Those who did not read newspaper sites voted for the Republicans by a similar margin, 8-1. So if you're saying if you're counting on mainstream media to reach those people already tuned out mainstream media.
Yeah.
They are not reachable through mainstream media. Nothing mainstream media says is going to affect them. They are inoculated against it. They have a vaccine against whatever mainstream media says, and it's very effective. If you think that's going to be your tool back to relevance, if that's going to be your messaging media, you're going to lose again.
But you also have to point out Fox News is mainstream media too. I mean, they are the leading cable news outlet in the country. That cannot be more mainstream.
Well, but that's while true, it's also to be blunt, irrelevant, because that's not how it's perceived.
I also was a couple of days ago reading an op-ed, and I can't remember who it was now, but I know I read about it on this show, about the fact that Democrats need to embrace, again, not just partisans or running to MSNBC, but they need to embrace, hey, look at me. I've been doing this 2 years now. It's still really hard for me to get a lot of top-tier Democrats on this show, but I think it's important that the party and their officials and their politicians do a better job embracing those that are willing to help spread their message and help lift their message to prop it up. But also that and I've said this at the state party level yesterday, that the Georgia Democratic Party makes it really hard to collaborate with them, to book guests, to even, my God, if they hold one more press conference on the steps at the Capitol under the rotunda without a mic hooked up directly to the source that they're trying to broadcast through, whether it's Facebook Live or YouTube, I can't use that. It's unusable. I then, of course, have to hard record it myself versus downloading it off of an FTP site or a Dropbox. Like, they make it hard to help them out.
Well, you know better than that on that kind of thing. As a journalist, I tend to not want cooperation from any party.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's you being, legitimately fair and balanced. You're not exactly trying to, obviously, you have a partisan lens, but it's not like, as a journalist anyway. As a columnist, it's one thing, but as a journalist, you're just trying to tell the story. But Democrats don't do a very good job at providing perspective on a story that needs to be told either.
Well, I just saw this morning a report that Delta's CEO is very happy because he's been promised by Trump that they will kill regulations that require automatic refunds if a flight is canceled.
I mean,
and that there's a second part that escapes me at the moment.
Probably something to do with safety, but who needs safety on an airplane? But I mean, but that is an attack on the working class budget right there. The fact that, like,
so Democrats ought to make that an TV ad, make that a radio ad. Make that a 30-second radio ad, put it on now, on sports radio, on black radio, on, everywhere you can. Just, this is what they're doing. This is one example of what they're doing to you, so that when next time somebody does get a canceled flight and they don't get their refund, they say, "Oh yeah, that's right. That's because of Republicans taking the side of the CEOs."
Yeah. No, that's an excellent point. Whereas you mentioned sports radio and hyper-targeting and messaging, obviously we're seeing Democrats being potentially baited into abandoning the trans community because there's some internal arguing within the party about whether or not embracing trans culture or wokeism, I guess, all in general, has somehow hindered the party. And I've been cautioning folks, do not abandon people just because they're the ones being attacked. There was a hyper targeted messaging about trans sports and trans activism and support from Kamala Harris for the trans community. And I don't think that was a mistake or an accident. We've seen a spike in the white male under 40 vote breaking for Trump this election cycle. And I don't think that the targeting of the trans community, I think it had an impact, is what I guess I'm saying.
Absolutely. There was a reason they ran that ad over and over and over again of Kamala pledging to pay for surgeries for trans prisoners.
And actually, she didn't really pledge that. That's just federal law. That's law that existed when Trump was president, too.
But she did pledge that.
To protect the law.
Well,
I mean,
it doesn't matter.
I mean,
the part you're talking about does not matter.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was reading, I know what it was. I was listening to a podcast where a guest said that was all of 2 procedures in the last 4 years.
Sure.
More money was spent on the attack ads than the procedures.
Oh, multiple, probably 100-fold, 1,000-fold. Absolutely.
Lastly,
but why did that ad keep appearing? It kept appearing because Republicans knew it was working.
Yeah, and there was no answer to it. I mean, I don't profess to know what the answer should have been, but I think in summation, no, that's federal law. She was saying she's going to protect federal law because.
But again, that's a legalistic response to a cultural gut level argument, and that is not going to work.
Yeah. So what do Democrats do to pivot?
Make a gut level response to the contrary. It's just public decency to let these people live their lives the way they feel they have to live their lives. Don't look what Nancy Mace is doing in Congress. That is performative cruelty. People will respond and reject performative cruelty if it is explained to them in those terms and presented to them in those terms.
I was just going to ask you if Sarah McBride rising to Congress and Nancy Mace and Marjorie Taylor Greene playing a role of mean girls was going to have an impact on the way Americans see.
Well, not if people don't see it.
Yeah.
If it's not explained to them, the people who know that's happening are you and I, and people like us.
Yeah.
It's the cruelty of it isn't being explained.
Well, I mean, I'm obviously a little closer to that because I'm part of the alphabet mafia. I'm one of the G's in the LGBTQIA plus, and so
Sure.
I know folks in the trans community, and I have since college. So I'm a little closer to it, and I understand the cruelty, and I also understand just how delicate, the mental mindset is for anybody who has grown up gay, lesbian, transgender, or bisexual in this country. And I worry so much about, younger folks in that community who feel imperiled or feel ostracized. And I mean, when you're less than 1% of the population already, and it's such an overwhelming thing, not just to explain to your loved ones, but just to understand for yourself first, and then to see how the world seems to view you and mock you and ostracize you and insist you use a bathroom that you don't identify with. I mean, it's repugnant. It reminds me of, the cruel kids who mocked Pinocchio, and as children, we knew that was wrong.
Right. So that's the kind of gut level argument, because as children, it's wrong. Even children know it's wrong. They don't have to be told it's wrong. If you tell voters, look, this is what they want to do to these people will instinctively say that's wrong. That's the kind of gut level counter argument you have to make. Take one of the most effective arguments the Republicans have found on trans issues is the sports argument.
Yeah.
It's a very minor thing.
Well,
it almost never happens, but it does happen.
Yeah.
So I think Democrats have to be willing to let that go for the time being, because there are the number of trans people that affects,
yeah,
and the type of effect it has.
Mm-hmm.
If a trans athlete can't compete at the college level because of a rule, I wish that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
But you compare that to the trauma of of trans people in other parts of life that are much worse.
Yeah.
It's life or death.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right.
Liberals are right when they say that's a tiny thing that hardly ever happens. All right. If it's a tiny thing that hardly ever happens, why risk losing sympathy for the overall trans cause for this tiny thing that never happens?
But I also feel like we're falling victim even having that conversation to what the right is doing. Like I would be
that's okay.
But we'd be hard pressed to find a politician on the left who even stood up for or espoused the ability for trans athletes to compete at the high school or collegiate level anyway. It was much ado made a noise about this from the right. Find me a policy position on the Democratic Party platform or the Kamala Harris website where she says anything about trans athleticism.
Democrats do support that.
But I mean, it's
okay.
But it wasn't something that was laid out in policy, or there wasn't even like a campaign rally
you're arguing a legalistic point.
Yeah.
Look, Bill Clinton created "Don't Ask, Don't Tell" at a time in which that was considered by some to be revolutionary,
radical,
and by others to be a betrayal.
Mm-hmm.
Barack Obama, in running in 2008, would not come out in favor of gay marriage.
Right.
He came out in favor of protecting gay rights and et cetera thing, but gay marriage was not on the agenda.
Mm-hmm.
Some thought that was a betrayal. Some thought it was, revolutionary. 6 years later, things had changed.
Sure.
Then that's what you have to be willing to understand. I don't mean you personally, but I think that's what sometimes you have to make those trade-offs on that you don't want to have to make.
Right.
in order to get where you need to go.
Yeah, I get
for
what you're
for the community that you're trying to protect.
I get what you're saying. I'm just saying, like, I don't remember there being a candidate at any level on the Democratic ticket who was talking about trans athletes participating in women's sports from a lens of support. I just don't remember seeing that at all. I think it was mostly a concocted narrative. And I don't think it helped, by the way, that during the Summer Olympics, there was the scepter of that existence in women's boxing. Now, it turned out that the woman was a biological woman, but, you know, again, a lie got halfway around the world before the truth put its pants on. But that's neither here nor there. And by the way, let me point out that it's not as if the trans community or the LGBTQ plus community was out here marching in the streets for trans participation in sports either. This was not something that even the trans community or the LGBTQIA plus was pushing for. It was a concocted narrative, mostly from the right.
Have you seen the Will Ferrell documentary?
I have not, but I have heard it is very touching, that it is very sweet and
Yes,
and will
it is.
induce you to tears. No, I'm glad you brought that up because I do need to watch that. Absolutely.
Yes, you do.
Jay Bookman.
America does. America needs to see that.
Yeah, no, I that's a great revelation. I appreciate that. Jay Bookman, Georgia Recorder, with a new column out that talks about tariffs and mass deportations and the drastic impact it is likely to have on the Georgia economy. That's in today's Georgia Recorder. We'll include that in the show notes at ronshowatl.com. Jay, thanks for the time this morning. I appreciate it. Always good to catch up with you.
Thank you. Enjoy your weekend.
You do the same, my buddy. All right, so one more segment back in just a few minutes. The Ron Show on America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn or wherever you podcast. Final few minutes of the Ron Show, and let's see if I can do this in 3 minutes or so. Doug Turnbull, you may recognize the name if you live in or near Atlanta. He, of course, a traffic reporter on WSB AM and FM and works for Cox Media because that's who owns WSB AM and FM. So he also wrote for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, also owned by Cox. For the AJC, he is Gridlock Guy, and the headline in his op-ed, which came out a few days ago, How the Election Results Could Affect Atlanta Traffic. Donald Trump's presidential victory and Republicans' imminent control of both the U.S. Senate and House show a fairly clear direction for policy in 2025, he writes. And voters in Gwinnett and Cobb counties resoundingly defeated pivotal transportation special purpose local option sales tax, the SPLOST, that would have largely expanded bus services, including door-to-door microtransit, Doug Turnbull writes. So where does this leave transportation policy for the coming years? First, suburban Atlanta voters' decision to nix a 1% sales tax to fund several forms of mass transit sends urban planners in Gwinnett and Cobb back to the drawing board. Gwinnett voters, by a 28,000 vote margin, nixed a penny sales tax for transit for the fifth time in more than 50 years. Cobb residents killed a similar measure by 95,000. Remember, both of these are blue counties, by the way. The economy seems to be the main fallback for why Democrats think their 2024 efforts nationwide went so poorly, and supporters in Gwinnett and Cobb said as much to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution about the failed transit measures. Doug Turnbull says, I would argue that packaging of these SPLOSTs was the second biggest reason they failed. Cobb County opponents were very loud and kept pointing to the sheer numbers. 30 years, $11 billion is reason for alarm. And then they pointed to dreadful Cobb Link ridership numbers and stated the county was creating a low-demand solution that was seeking a problem. President-elect Trump's first administration very much stood in favor of roads versus transit. However, the 2019 infrastructure bill that Trump supported needed support and influence from Democrats to pass, and that bill did contain elements of clean energy, but it largely focused on streets and bridges. Biden's infrastructure covered those too, but also had many more green and climate-friendly initiatives than did Trump's. Biden's 2021 Act also invested much more heavily in mass transit and rail, along with expanding the network of electric vehicle chargers. The Trump team has already announced former New York Congressman Lee Zeldin as his nominee for the Environmental Protection Agency. Lee saying, we will restore U.S. energy dominance, revitalize our auto industry to bring back American jobs and make the U.S. the global leader of AI. We will do so while protecting access to clean air and water. He said that in a post on X. Doug Turnbull writes, the fact that energy dominance is in Zeldin's opening remark on his environmental role certainly signals the EPA's new direction. Rolling back environmental regulations will be very much on Zeldin's agenda. Loosening those regulations is favored by the trucking industry. For one, operational costs will go down in the freight industry. Of course, more heavy trucks on the streets means more wear and more traffic. Doug writes, I'm literally skimming through this op-ed, which I'll include in the show notes at ronshowatl.com. Doug concludes, for now, Georgians have spoken. The short-term economy meant more to voters than long-term mass transit. The counties spooked people with 30-year plans and did a poor job explaining the difference between bus rapid transit versus the current buses that people know. Or as I said, a lack of vision. It's going to do it for today's Ron Show. Show notes at ronshowatl.com. My thanks to Jay Bookman for joining us. Replay 5 to 6 p.m. on America One Radio, 11 p.m. to midnight at Progressive Voices, wherever you podcast. Have a great day. See you tomorrow.